In lesson 4.1, we learned that if two triangles have three pairs of congruent corresponding sides and three pairs of corresponding congruent angles, then the two triangles are congruent. So, if you know that A is congruent to D, and we show they are congruent by putting an arc in there, and you know B is congruent to E, we'll show these two are congruent by putting in two arcs, and you know C is congruent to F, and if you also know that AB is congruent to DE, BC is congruent to EF, and AC is congruent to DF, then we finally know that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. However, there are some shortcuts to proving or showing two triangles are congruent. You can prove that triangles are congruent using the two postulates below. So the first one that we have is side, 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 or SSS for short. If all three sides of a triangle are congruent to all three sides of another triangle, then those two triangles are congruent. So you can see that if JK is congruent to YX, and KL is congruent to YZ, and ZX is congruent to IL, then we can know that these two triangles are congruent. In a triangle, the angle formed by any two sides is called the included angle for those sides. In the diagram of ABC above, the included angle formed by the two sides AB and AC is angle A. The included angle for BC and AC is angle C. The included angle for AB and BC is angle B. That's what we call the included angle. You can think of the included angle as the angle between two sides of the triangle. We also have postulate 2, 4.2, side, angle, side postulate. If two sides and the included angle of a triangle are congruent to two sides and the included angle of another triangle, then those two triangles are congruent. So for example, if PQ and DE are congruent, and you know PR is congruent to FD, and finally you know angle P is congruent to angle D, then triangle PQR and DEF are congruent. P is the included angle by QP and QR. Angle D is the included angle for FD and ED. So here are some practice exercise examples. So number one, what other information do you need to prove that TRF is congruent to triangle DFR by side angle side? Answer using congruent statements. So the one thing that we know is we know that they both have an angle in common. We also know that they have a side in common. It might not be obvious which side, but they both share a side. They both share RF. So since they both share RF, we know that that is in common and that is congruent. So the last thing that I would have to know in order to do this problem is I would also have to know another side. So if I'm doing side, angle, side, I would have to know that RT is congruent to DF because that would be side, angle, side down there. So in order to do this, I would have to say that RT is congruent to FD. So we're looking for the values that we need. So in other words, we need to know that these two sides are the same. Number two, what other information do you need to prove that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF by side, angle, side? So we're doing side, and we have a side, and we know we have to have an included angle between those. And it has to be this angle right here. And so I have to know these two angles because the included angle for ABC is angle B. The included angle for FED is triangle E. So what I would have to do is I would have to know that angle B is congruent to angle E. On the back side, would you use side, 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 or side angle side to prove the triangle is congruent? If there's not enough information to prove the triangle is congruent by side, 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 or side angle side, write not enough information. If congruent, write all three pairs of congruent corresponding parts and a congruent statement for the two triangles. So, if we look at this one, number 3, do we have enough information to show that they're congruent? So one thing that we don't want to miss is we don't want to forget about this side that they share. So if we're looking at that side that they share, then what we want to know is, do we have enough information to do side, 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 or side angle side? Well, we can't do side, side, side because we don't know this side. We don't know if these two sides are congruent, so I can't do side, side, side. If I do side angle side, well, I know an angle, but unfortunately it's not the included angle. It has to go side angle side. This one I have to go side angle side. So this one is not enough information. Number 4, if I look at it, remember, don't forget the side that they share. So this side they share. So if you notice, AB is congruent to CD. There's one congruent side. I have BC as congruent to AD. That's good. And then AC is congruent to itself, which is in both of the triangles. So I know that these two triangles are congruent by side, side, side. Next, what we're going to do is write all three pairs of congruent corresponding parts and a congruent statement for the two triangles. So I know that AB is congruent to CD. I know that also DA, AB, which should be BC, is congruent to AD. And lastly, AC is congruent to AC. So my congruency statement means that I want to put the letters in the same order. So if I go from A I want to do it in the same order. So A to B is going to be C to D. And then A to B to C, and this will be A. All right, number 5. Do I have enough information to show that these are congruent? Well, I don't know this angle. It's not marked, so I can't just assume. And this side, I don't know if it's congruent, so in this case, this is not enough information. So not enough information. All right, number 6. If you look at number 6, using side, 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 or side angle side, we have an angle, we have a side. Unfortunately, I would have to either know this side right here is congruent to this side right here, or I'd have to know that this side is congruent to this side. So again, we have one that is not enough information. And number 7, if I look at number 7, we have two sides that are congruent, and we just would have to have this included angle. Now, the good thing about this is we know that these two angles are the same because they are vertical angles. So I know that these two triangles are the same. So therefore, I know that PR is congruent to SR. I know that QR is congruent to TR. And I know PQ is congruent to ST. Now to do my congruency statement, I'm just going to go in order. So I know that S to R, and I like to do it in parts, so S to R and P to R. So S to R to T and P R Q. So those two triangles are congruent. Number 8. What other information, if any, do you need to prove that these two triangles are congruent by side angle side? Explain. To start, list the pairs of congruent corresponding parts you already know. So AB. AB is congruent to HG. And BC is congruent to GF. So the other thing that we would have to know, since we're doing side angle side, is this included angle. So we'd have to know that angle B is congruent to angle G. Number 9. What do I know so far? Well, I know that XZ is congruent to RT. I also know that ZY is congruent to TS. I also know that angle Y is congruent to angle S. Now, unfortunately, this is not an included angle within these two sides. The included angle is right here. So in order to do side angle side, we'd have to know this included angle. We actually don't need to know this angle, but we do have to know this one right here. So the thing that we'd have to know is we'd have to know that angle Z is congruent to angle T. Number 10, a carpenter is building a support for a bird feeder. He wants the triangles on either side of the vertical posts to be congruent. He measures and finds that AB is congruent to DE and that AC is congruent to DF. What would we need to measure to prove that the triangles are congruent using side angle side? What would we need to measure to prove that the angles are congruent using side side side? So the first thing I like to do is I like to mark what I know. So I know that AB is congruent to DE. I also know that AC is congruent to DF. So in order to do side angle side, I would have to know the angle between these two sides. So in other words, I'd have to know that angle A is congruent to angle D. To do side, 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 I'd have to know the remaining side. I'd have to know that BC is congruent to EF. Finally, number 11, an artist is drawing two triangles. She draws each so that the two sides are 4, 5 long, and an angle is 55 degrees. Are her triangles congruent? Explain. So she draws two triangles.
Skylar Tyler to the front office, please. Skylar Tyler to
so that the two sides are 4 inches and 5 inches long, and an angle is 55 degrees. So if I have 4 and 5, and an angle is 55, she draws each. So now the question is, where is the 55? We'd have to be more specific in order to answer if this is 55 here, or if the 55 is here, or if the 55 is here. So in this type of problem, I would say no. The triangles may not be congruent. Or you can also have a yes and say they are congruent if everything is in the right spot, if you have side angle side. So it either could be no or it could be yes if the sides are side angle side. So it can either be both ways. It depends on how you look at the problem. So that can be either a no problem or it can be a yes problem.